the environment inside a procedure room, like an endoscopy unit, is this constant high-stakes balancing act. You have to move quickly for the patient, but you just cannot, under any circumstances, compromise the sterile environment.
Right.
And then when you introduce an infectious patient, that precision dance becomes a full-scale choreography of containment.
Really does. It becomes a checklist where the cost of a single error is just incredibly high.
Yeah.
And we're diving deep today into protocols based on some real clinical scenarios a listener shared. And, the core challenge we're looking at is rapid adaptation, precision under pressure.
So our mission for you is to quickly and thoroughly understand the critical communication, the exact equipment you need, and the really detailed step-by-step procedures for two very different threats. We're going to contrast a standard contact infection, something like C. diff, with a much more complex respiratory and contact challenge.
Right.
And we're using a specific, historically relevant COVID-19 protocol as our model for that.
And what's so fascinating here is that the sources, the protocols, they don't start with equipment. They don't start with masks or gowns.
No.
They start with one absolute foundational element: communication.
That's right. Before any procedural step, the communication has to clearly define the precautions needed.
Is it contact?
Droplet?
Is it airborne? Or, is it some combination? And that classification, that single decision, is the domino that dictates absolutely everything else.
Exactly. The signage, the gear, the procedural changes. The sources just immediately emphasize that good protocol starts outside the room.
Right.
The team gets informed, the isolation signage goes up on the door. So if you, the staff member, walk up to that door and see that sign, it raises a big question.
What's the single non-negotiable first step you take before anything else, regardless of the pathogen?
Yes.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The team is informed. The sign is on the door, signaling the threat. So the first concrete physical action you take before you even think about a hairnet or a gown is hand hygiene.
It's the gatekeeper.
It is. And this is where the sources get really specific. It's not just a quick pass under the water.
No.
The mandate is proper hand washing for at least 20 seconds, meticulously following the established clinical protocol. You're scrubbing, not rinsing.
Now, here's a point of potential confusion that the source is actually clarifying.
Yeah.
While the main rule is hand washing, they do note an alternative.
To sanitizer.
Right? Using an alcohol-based hand sanitizer if your hands have been, visibly confirmed as clean.
Yeah.
Especially in high-volume situations.
But that distinction is so crucial, particularly when we get into our first scenario. The source material really emphasizes that while alcohol sanitizer is generally effective against a lot of viruses and bacteria, maintaining proper hand hygiene with soap and water is still called out as the single best way to prevent hospital-acquired infections. And here's the key difference.
Okay.
Alcohol-based sanitizers are often totally ineffective against certain hardy pathogens like C. diff spores.
Which means the choice of agent washing versus sanitizing is determined by the pathogen itself. It's not just about convenience.
Precisely. It connects that initial communication with the very first physical action you take.
So that sets the stage perfectly for our first case study, contact isolation.
Okay.
The patient has C. diff, Clostridium difficile. The nurse communicates this is a strictly contact isolation case.
So it's spreading through spores requires surface transmission protocols.
Exactly. The team puts up the contact isolation signage. And since C. diff is all about contact, the standard PPE you need right when you enter is relatively straightforward.
A gown and gloves.
A gown and gloves. The goal is just to create a barrier between you and any contaminated surfaces or fluids.
However, and this is a key point, because staff are assisting in an invasive procedure, the endoscopy, the sources require immediate additions to that base level of PPE.
So the procedure itself dictates a whole new layer of protection.
Yes, even though the pathogen is contact-based. So that procedural requirement means you also have to wear a face mask, a hairnet, and either goggles or a face shield.
And that's not for respiratory protection from the C. diff, right? It's for splash protection.
Exactly. You are protecting your mucous membranes, your eyes, nose, mouth, from any potential contamination during the procedure itself.
Which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You're dealing with the GI tract, so potential splash contamination is a non-starter. This really highlights how these protocols are layered.
Yeah.
You've got the core isolation, contact in this case, plus the procedural requirements.
And the risk here is unique. Because C. diff spores are incredibly durable, they can persist on surfaces for a very long time. So the procedural changes extend to the equipment, to the whole environment.
Right.
You might be using more single-use scopes, and the cleaning process after is just absolutely robust, often involving specific sporicidal disinfectants.
So the knowledge isn't just what you wear, but what you do to the environment before, during, and after. Okay, procedure's done. Immediate risk is managed. The exit sequence, even for just contact isolation, is precise.
Hmm.
You remove the PPE inside the isolation room, and then the very first thing you do when you come out of that room is wash your hands again, not sanitize.
Wash to deal with those hardy spores.
It bookends the whole interaction with soap and water
So
containment.
we go from a surface contamination challenge with C. diff to a threat that just fundamentally alters the entire battleground.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Hmm.
Let's jump to scenario 2, the triple threat, which is exponentially more complex.
Okay.
So this patient's in for GI bleeding, and they are confirmed COVID positive. And the context here is absolutely critical.
Hmm.
The sources specify this is based on a protocol from May 2020,
A moment in time defined by high aerosol risk and severe resource scarcity.
which directly impacts the entire procedure. Because the disease involves respiratory transmission, this patient needs precautions for droplet, airborne, A&E contact, all at once.
Which means the signage is the maximum alert. Respiratory plus contact isolation.
And that shift from contact to airborne totally changes your entry prep. Unlike the C. diff case, this protocol requires you wear the full PPE outside the room if the patient is already in there.
You're creating the containment bubble before you even enter the contaminated airspace.
Exactly. And this is where the PPE list just dramatically expands.
The full suit of armor.
Right. So we start the donning sequence from the top down, hairnet, then face shield or goggles for your eyes.
And the core difference is the respiratory component. So instead of a simple surgical mask,
You need an N95. The higher level protection designed to filter out 95% of those airborne particles. It directly addresses the risk of aerosolized virus just hanging in the air.
and here is where that May 2020 context really comes into play. Because of the extreme scarcity of N95s back then, the protocol actually mandated wearing a standard surgical mask over the N95 mask.
That's a fascinating detail, isn't it? It shows that compromise between the ideal protocol and the reality of resource constraints.
Yeah, the surgical mask acts as a barrier. It protects the front of the valuable N95 from large droplets, from visible contaminants, which allowed for its controlled reuse.
Okay, so respiratory protection is on. Then you move to the contact barriers,
Hmm.
the gown, which has to cover everything, and then gloves. And for this one,
Double glove.
double glove. Why the double glove? That seems like overkill.
It's a systemic defense against self-contamination when you're taking it all off. If that outer glove gets contaminated or, tears during the procedure, you have a second layer of protection. It's especially important during an invasive procedure where fluid contact is a guarantee.
Right. And finally, shoe covers to complete the barrier.
So you're fully donned.
You enter the room, and the procedure itself is modified. The source details 2 immediate environmental control steps. First, staff must immediately sanitize the surfaces with a disinfectant.
Even before touching the patient.
Yeah. It acknowledges that the surfaces might already be contaminated just from the patient being there. And second, you maintain social distance from the patient as much as clinically possible during setup.
And the actual endoscopy procedure has its own containment protocol. To cut down the risk of aerosol generation during intubation or the procedure itself, the patient typically has it done either with a special type of oxygen mask that's designed to minimize viral escape, or, more commonly in severe cases, with full endotracheal intubation. The goal is to control and contain any air leaving the patient's respiratory tract.
And critically, the final action is environmental again. You clean the surfaces again around the patient, the equipment, everything before the patient is extubated.
It's all structured to contain those aerosolized particles.
So you've navigated the triple threat, the environment is clean, the patient is stable, and now comes the culminating and frankly, most hazardous step for your own safety.
Removing all that gear.
You can make it through the entire procedure safely and still fail right here.
Absolutely. This removal process, the doffing sequence, it's rightly described as an art. The cognitive load is immense. The rule is simple in theory, but it's so complex to execute. Do not contaminate your hands, face, eyes, or nose while removing gear that is now just saturated with contaminants.
Okay, so here's where sequence matters more than anything.
Yeah.
You always want to remove the most contaminated piece first and turn that contamination inward. The very first action, you ask an assistant to help you remove the gown.
The gown is the largest contaminated surface area. You have to carefully pull it away from your body, peeling it off from the inside out. You're basically rolling the contaminated outer surface into a bundle.
So it doesn't brush against your clothes or skin.
Exactly.
Once that's contained, you remove the outer layer of gloves. Because you were double gloved, you peel off that heavily soiled outer layer and then right away.
Hand hygiene. You sanitize the second set of gloves. That's the first critical checkpoint.
After that checkpoint, you leave the room, or at least cross the designated threshold, and you repeat the hand hygiene. You have to establish a clean hands moment before you touch your face.
Then comes the eye and face protection. You remove the face shield or goggles, handling them only by the head strap, never the front.
Right. And if that shield is being reused, like in the May 2020 scenario, you clean it immediately. And you follow that with
Immediate hand hygiene.
hand hygiene again.
The crucial command under all of this is the rule to perform hand hygiene between every single major contaminated step. It forces a physical and mental break so you don't accidentally transfer something from your eye shield to the area around your mask.
Okay, finally, you address the respiratory protection. This is the highest risk step after one last hand hygiene.
You deal with the two masks, remembering the cardinal rule.
Yeah.
Never touch the front of the mask.
Never.
You start by removing the surgical mask that was overlaying the N95. Again, only using the ear loops for ties, pulling it away from your face.
And then, following the exact same rule, using the straps behind your head, you remove the N95 mask.
And the key cognitive distinction here is that the N95 must be removed last. It's your primary defense against airborne particles, and taking off that outer contaminated layer first reduces the risk of aerosol contact during that final step.
Wow.
Once that intricate dance is done, you sanitize one last time, you put on a clean surgical mask for general protection, and then the absolute final step once you are totally clear of the zone.
Get into the habit of a thorough hand washing.
Yes.
If we connect all this to the bigger picture, you're not just wearing gear. You're taking part in a systematic, layered defense against self-contamination. The knowledge you need is just the absolute precision of how to follow the protocol, recognizing that the threat level C. diff spores versus an airborne virus completely dictates the equipment and the order of operations.
It's all about cognitive discipline under pressure. It's a systematic approach that just shows how critical those small details are, turning what looks like a simple checklist into a procedure designed to keep you safe during the highest risk moments.
You now have a comprehensive framework for understanding not just the level of the threat contact versus airborne, but all the practical logistics you need to meet that threat. We discussed that final critical action, removing the masks without touching the front. Why is that specific, meticulous final action avoiding touching the highly contaminated filter material? Arguably the single most critical step you can take to prevent a lethal airborne self-infection, even after dozens of hand sanitizations. Something for you to mull or explore on your own.